Part 1. In Chapter 1, Rika experiences a vivid vision of destruction, seeing people falling from a high tower, bodies hanging, and Ufrith burning. Her companion, Izern, dismisses her concerns, but suggests that Rika's visions could be a sign of the Long Eye, a mysterious ability to see into the future. Rika struggles with her fits, feeling cursed, but Izern reframes her condition as a blessing. They discuss the potential of Rika's powers, and Izern tells her that the Long Eye will reveal its secrets when it chooses. While traveling, they encounter a group of men aligned with Stour Nightfall, intent on bringing Ufrith back to the north. Tensions rise, and a confrontation leads to the men's deaths, with Rika reluctantly involved in the violence. As they approach Ufrith, Rika is horrified to see it burning, confirming the vision, and Izern declares that Rika truly has the Long Eye. In Chapter 2, Leo leads his troops in a chaotic battle against the Northmen, displaying his fierce combat skills and gaining the admiration of his men. He relishes the victory, feeling like the hero he always imagined himself to be. However, his triumph is overshadowed by a harsh conversation with his mother, who chastises him for his reckless behavior. Leo's impulsive actions during the battle resulted in the death of Ritter, one of his trusted men. His mother criticizes Leo for valuing glory over strategy, urging him to learn from the consequences of his rashness. Despite her tough love, she acknowledges his bravery and reminds him that true victory comes from careful planning, not recklessness. Leo is left with guilt and sorrow over Ritter's death, realizing the weight of leadership. As he steps outside, the men cheer for him, but he feels conflicted, understanding that there is more to being a leader than just winning battles. In Chapter 3, Rika and Izern continue their journey through a cold, miserable landscape after the destruction of Rika's home. Rika reflects on the boy she killed, haunted by guilt, but Izern dismisses it, urging Rika to focus on survival instead. Izern shares her practical wisdom, teaching Rika survival skills as they endure hunger and harsh conditions. Despite her inner turmoil, Rika continues to struggle with the aftermath of her actions, questioning the morality of what she did. Izern, while blunt and seemingly indifferent, offers a perspective that guilt is a luxury for those who are still alive and can afford it. As they rest in a cold, uncomfortable shelter, Izern reveals that she is committed to keeping her promise to Rika's father to help Rika survive and unlock her Long Eye abilities. Izern also hints at her personal stake in a better future for the North driven by her own selfish motivations. In Chapter 4, Savine navigates the gritty underworld of Adua, where she owns a significant portion of the Hill Street Foundry. She revels in the industrial chaos, using her wealth and status to dominate the lower classes, even giving a silver coin to a boy to maintain her image of virtue. Accompanied by her confidant Zuri, Savine enters a grimy alehouse where she confronts Majir, a business associate. Savine successfully negotiates a deal for a fifth share of an important canal project from the stubborn architect, Dietem Dancourt, using manipulation and subtle threats to secure her position. Despite Court's initial resistance, Savine's ability to exploit both greed and fear forces him to comply. She leaves him defeated, reflecting on how money and power are her measures of success. With the deal secured, she comments on her obsession with money, framing it as a way to keep score in the game of life. In Chapter 5, Orso watches a public hanging of 3 individuals convicted of treason, including a young girl. Despite his disdain for executions, he fails to intervene, showing his general apathy toward injustice. He is distracted by the presence of Hildy, his valet, and his companions, who jest and ridicule the event. Orso is confronted by Bremer den Gorst, who informs him that his mother has summoned him. At the palace, Orso faces his mother's scorn for his lack of responsibility and failure to take his position seriously. His mother insists that he should focus on his future as king and fulfill his duty. Orso, intoxicated and disillusioned, dismisses her concerns. The chapter ends with a moment of uncomfortable intimacy between Orso and Savine dan Glokta, where he reflects on her sharpness and discipline, though he fails to take meaningful action. Orso's lack of direction and responsibility is emphasized throughout. In Chapter 6, Vic reveals her tragic past to Grise, Tallow, and Sibbald. She explains how her father, once a respected man, was tortured and sent to a labor camp where she grew up amid suffering and loss. The conversation shifts when Sibbald informs them of the recent hangings of Reed, Cuthbert, and his daughter for their attempts to organize workers. Grise is enraged, but Vic remains focused, suggesting that the Inquisition will soon come for those they know. Sebald reveals that he's the only one the Inquisition has information on, and Vic insists he must leave Adua to stay safe. The group decides to strike at the Hill Street Foundry using Gurkish fire, with Vic warning them about the consequences of killing innocent people. They begin to plan the attack, with Vic assuming a leadership role, ensuring every detail is carefully considered. Vic and Sebald share a quiet moment discussing their uncertain future and the hope for a great change. In Chapter 7, Rika wakes in a cold, bleak world to find a man hanged above her makeshift bed. Eisern remains unmoved, offering Rika some food and blunt advice, reflecting on her own tough upbringing. The two women discuss their grim reality, with Eisern stressing the need to keep moving despite the dangers, including the enemy closing in. Rika, haunted by the loss of her home in Ufrith, feels the weight of her past and the hardships ahead. As they continue, Rika becomes overwhelmed by the harshness of their situation and starts to cry. Eisern, however, responds with a sharp slap to her face, insisting that Rika must stop being soft and learn to survive. The harshness of the world and Eisern's tough love provoke Rika into a fierce reaction, punching Eisern in the mouth. The encounter sparks something inside Rika, who begins to embrace her strength and resolve. In Chapter 8, Leo and his companions observe a group of Northmen stationed on a ridge, waiting for them to make a move. Leo is frustrated by the boredom of war, longing for action. The group discusses their situation and their varying experiences with war, with Leo growing increasingly impatient. They spot their enemy's position and debate strategies, with Leo's mother, the Lady Governor, offering her tactical advice. She plans to use their weaker soldiers to draw the Northmen's attention while keeping their best forces hidden. Leo, feeling the pressure of leadership, reflects on his role and the legacy of his father. Despite his mother's tactical wisdom, Leo yearns for direct action. He attempts to lift his soldiers' spirits by engaging with them, sharing his cloak with a cold drummer boy, and encouraging them with humor. Leo continues to struggle with the burden of leadership, seeking to inspire his men while grappling with his frustrations. In Chapter 9, Clover is teaching two boys swordsmanship, but their lack of skill frustrates him. As he watches them spar, he reflects on the importance of timing and strategy in combat. Soon, Black Calder approaches, seeking Clover's help with his son, Stour Nightfall, who is becoming increasingly arrogant and reckless. Calder explains that Stour set fire to Ufrith, undermining his father's careful plans. Clover, known for his loyalty, reluctantly agrees to assist Calder. He is introduced to Stour, who is brash and full of self-confidence, surrounded by sycophants. Stour challenges Clover, but Clover remains calm, offering a mix of sarcasm and advice. He tries to guide Stour, warning him about the consequences of unchecked ambition, but Stour dismisses him, eager for conquest. As Stour moves on, Clover, along with Wonderful, shares a moment of mutual disdain for the young warrior's arrogance. In Chapter 10, Rika hides in an icy river, desperately trying to avoid detection by the enemy soldiers passing overhead. She is with Eisern, who remains calm and focused despite their grim situation. As Rika struggles with fear, hunger, and the memory of the dead bodies they found earlier, she overhears a conversation between Stour Nightfall and his followers. Stour reveals that he wants to capture Rika, the Dogman's daughter, and plans to use her as a tool to break his enemies by targeting what they love. His brutal intentions include humiliating her and sending her mutilated remains as a message. Rika, seething with anger, vows to take vengeance if she survives. The conversation shifts to Stour's disturbing behavior, with his followers expressing concern. Rika is left boiling with rage, determined to exact revenge on Stour Nightfall, despite the lessons of her father about avoiding vengeance. In Chapter 11, Gunnar Broad returns home after 2 years away, but the familiar landscape feels foreign. He's changed, haunted by what he's seen and done, and dreads the reunion with his wife Liddy. When she opens the door, his emotions overwhelm him and he begins to cry, feeling both relief and regret. The two discuss Broad's experiences, including a gift of special lenses he received after saving a commander. However, their reunion is marred by news that their flock has been sold to Lord Isher due to new land restrictions. Broad's frustration grows as he confronts the changing landscape and the loss of their livelihood. When Seldom, a miller's brother, arrives with a group of armed men and threatens Broad, the tension escalates. In a violent outburst, Broad attacks and kills Seldom and his companions, realizing too late the gravity of his actions, leaving him and Liddy in stunned silence. In Chapter 12, Savine dan Glokta attends a meeting of Adua's Solar Society, where she is praised for her investment and vision. The event, hosted by Henrik Kernsbik, celebrates the progress of industry and innovation, with Savine strategically navigating the crowd to secure investments and support. Throughout the evening, she deftly handles business proposals and rivals, using her charm and influence to further her goals. One man, Yoru Sulfur, a member of the Order of Magi, catches her attention, but she quickly dismisses him, focusing on her own objectives. As the king arrives, Savine reflects on her position in society, noting the delicate balance of power. However, her evening is interrupted by news from the north, and the king hurriedly departs, leaving Savine to handle the fallout. Determined and strategic, she plans to use the situation to her advantage, ensuring her continued rise in Adua's power structure. In Chapter 13, Orso, the heir to the throne, wakes to unsettling news from his advisor, Tunny, about an invasion of the Protectorate by the Northmen, led by the fearsome Stour Nightfall. Despite his usual apathy, Orso feels a surge of emotion, anger, excitement, and worry, and decides he must take action. He heads to his father, the king, for a fencing session, and discusses the threat of the Northmen. The king dismisses the idea of taking military action, citing financial difficulties and the complexities of ruling. Orso, eager to prove himself, proposes leading the expedition against the Northmen, but his father mocks him for lacking experience. Orso insists he can raise the necessary troops, and the king challenges him to prove his commitment by assembling a battalion. Motivated by the opportunity, Orso resolves to take charge and finally make a difference, aiming to raise 5,000 men to fight the Northmen. In Chapter 14, Savine practices fencing with her father, the Archlector, under the watchful eye of Gorst. Despite her quick footwork and determination, her father is never satisfied with her efforts, pushing her to improve her stance and technique. The discussion shifts to the ongoing conflict in the north, where Scale Ironhand's Northmen have invaded, and the Lady Governor Finri Dan Brock is struggling to defend the Protectorate. Savine criticizes the lack of action by the Union and expresses frustration with the way men reap the glory of women's hard work. As they continue sparring, her father reveals the harsh reality of leadership. The nation is full of enemies, and even in times of crisis, those in power cannot always act. During the practice, Savine is caught off guard by Gorst's overwhelming strength and speed, leaving her wounded and humiliated. Her father reminds her that violence is different from fencing, a lesson Savine learns the hard way. In Chapter 15, Gunnar Broad struggles with the consequences of his past decisions. He feels trapped in a small, miserable cellar with Liddy and May and Valbeck, regretting his time in Styria and the choices that led him here. Despite his promise to Liddy to avoid trouble, Broad finds himself in a brewing conflict with a man in line for work at a brewery. After a tense confrontation, Broad is hired, thanks to an old acquaintance, Sarlby, who recalls Broad's reputation from their time in Styria. Sarlby introduces Broad to the Breakers, a group of rebels seeking to overthrow the social order, promising a future where the working class is no longer oppressed. Though initially reluctant, Broad begins to feel drawn to the cause. However, he resolves to keep his promise to Liddy and avoid getting involved in any more violence, despite the temptation. In Chapter 16, Vic and her crew prepare to execute a risky plan to deliver barrels to the foundry, but things quickly spiral out of control. As they approach the gates, their efforts are interrupted by the sudden appearance of soldiers shouting, "In the name of His Majesty!" The plan unravels as the crew is ambushed and a chaotic fight breaks out. Vic runs for cover with Sybil, but the situation worsens as he reveals a dagger, using it to fatally wound himself, leaving Vic in shock. As she watches Sybil bleed out, Grease's screams echo in the distance, signaling her capture. Despite her best efforts to save him, Sybil dies, and Vic is left covered in his blood, helpless. The chapter ends with Vic being found by the Practicals, as the betrayal within her crew becomes apparent. In Chapter 17, Rika finds herself in a desperate situation as she's chased by dogs and narrowly escapes a ravine. After a series of tense moments, she uses her newfound long eye to deflect an arrow meant for Izern, revealing her power. Despite this success, Izern is wounded by another arrow, and they are cornered by a large man with a scarred face. However, the man, revealed to be Call Shivers, a familiar ally, arrives just in time to help. He lifts Eisern despite her protests and reassures them that they need to focus on their next steps. Rika, exhausted and shaken, is left struggling to keep up, but Shivers encourages her to stay strong. The chapter ends with Shivers taking the lead, heading towards safety, with Rika's father waiting for them. In Chapter 18, Clover and Wonderful discuss life, loyalty, and the futility of feuds as they await Stour Nightfall's arrival. Stour, accompanied by his warriors, is angry that Rika has escaped and blames Clover for not catching her. Clover, indifferent to the situation, deflects Stour's anger with sarcastic remarks, suggesting that Stour's obsession with duels and glory will ultimately lead to his downfall, much like the Bloody Nine. As Stour rants about wanting to be as feared and famous as the Bloody Nine, Clover reflects on the nature of men's desires and the meaningless cycle of violence. Clover, content to bide his time, dismisses the idea of taking part in Stour's madness. The chapter ends with Clover relaxing under a tree, noting that the difference between biding time and wasting it lies in achieving results. In Chapter 19, Leo faces Gloward in a physical contest, confident despite the size difference. As they spar, Leo recalls stories of great warriors like the Bloody Nine, which fuels his determination. His attempts to overpower Gloward with brute force fail, but Leo quickly shifts tactics, using his wits and agility to outmaneuver the larger man. Eventually, Leo manages to trip Gloward, forcing him to surrender. As the crowd cheers, Leo's past catches up with him when he recognizes Rika among the onlookers. She approaches, and the two reconnect, exchanging banter about their past and the hardships she's endured. Ricky's bold personality shines as she recounts the dangers she's faced, including being pursued by Stour Nightfall's men. Leo and Rika share a moment of mutual respect, and he is struck by her maturity. As they talk, their playful dynamics suggest old connections are far from lost. In Chapter 20, Vic is interrogated by the feared Arch-Lector Glokta. After being stripped, chained, and left in a stark white room, Vic remains composed despite the situation. Glokta, now a crippled man in a chair, questions her loyalty, but Vic stands firm, proving her commitment. She reveals Sybilt's death while subtly testing Talow's resolve. Glokta is interested in Tallow, suggesting he could still serve the king, and Vic offers him a chance to cooperate, promising him and his sister safety in exchange. She lies about her past in the camps, presenting herself as unwavering, knowing the truth would only make her more vulnerable. After unlocking Talow's chains, she leaves him with a task to gather information on the Gurkish fire, while asserting that those who don't stand with the winners end up losers. Vic's cold pragmatism highlights her survival-driven mentality. In Chapter 21, Orso seeks help from Lord Marshal Brint and Lord Chancellor Gorodetz to secure an army to fight the Northmen. Brint agrees to support him, but is unable to provide the necessary men due to ongoing unrest and financial issues in the Union. Gorodetz explains the dire financial situation, citing the Union's significant debts, and reveals that the Arch-Lector controls the priorities of the closed council, making any military action contingent on his approval. Orso's request for funds is met with resistance, as the government is focused on maintaining internal stability. The Arch-Lector, Glokta, eventually meets with Orso and reveals that despite the urgency in the north, the Union's priorities lie in preserving its fragile internal order. After a frustrating conversation, Orso turns to his friends for advice and contemplates an alternative plan involving someone with money, ambition, and patience, signaling a shift in strategy. In Chapter 22, Savine conceals her bruises from fencing with Bremerdan Gorst, banters with her mother, and then prepares for a dinner with investors. While dressing, she manages her business affairs, coldly calling in debts and planning a visit to Valbec. Zuri, her indispensable companion, announces she must leave for the south to help her family amid chaos and war, leaving Savine shaken but resigned. Lisbeth is chosen to stand in for Zuri, though Savine finds her inadequate. Later, Prince Orso's servant Hildy arrives with a message, leading Savine to meet Orso. Their affair intensifies, and during their encounter, Orso reveals his plan to lead a northern campaign if he can raise funds. Against her better judgment, Savine impulsively agrees to finance him without conditions. Realizing her recklessness, she struggles to understand her actions, but ultimately admits the truth. She has fallen completely in love with Orso. Part 2. In Chapter 23, Broad and Sarlby work in the brewhouse, discussing the hardships of chimney sweep boys and the injustices faced by the poor. Sarlby urges Broad to join the Breakers, promising change and fairness, but Broad resists, saying he must focus on his family. Their talk is interrupted when a young sweep becomes trapped in a hot chimney. Broad desperately tears at the bricks with his bare hands and a crowbar, but the boy is pulled out too late, horribly burned and dead. Enraged, Broad nearly kills the drunken sweepmaster, but Malmer intervenes, calming him down and stopping the violence. Shaken and grieving, Broad stares at the boy's ruined body. The moment leaves him questioning his resolve to stay out of the fight. In the end, Broad asks where the Breakers hold their meetings, signaling a shift in his willingness to consider joining their cause. In Chapter 24, Riki attends a feast with her father, the Dogmen, and their allies. Drunk and rowdy, she embarrasses herself but shares heartfelt moments with her father, who admits he feels old and uncertain about leading further battles. Rika fiercely reassures him of his strength, though his frailty worries her. He cautions her not to harden her heart, despite Isernifale's advice, telling her that her heart, along with her bones and brains, will be needed when he is gone. Later, Rika banters with Call Shivers, showing him unexpected kindness. She then joins Leo Danbrock, where their playful exchange turns flirtatious. Both drunk, they slip away from the feast, kiss passionately, and stumble into a barn. Their encounter grows intimate as they clumsily undress, giving in to desire. For Rika, the night becomes a mix of grief, love, and reckless abandon in the midst of war and uncertainty. In Chapter 25, Leo wakes beside Rika after their night together, realizing how different she is from the women of Ostenhorn and feeling unexpectedly drawn to her. Their intimacy is interrupted when Rika suddenly suffers a violent seizure. Panicked, Leo rushes half-dressed through camp to find Isernifale, who takes charge and calms Rika through the fit. When it ends, Rika, bloodied and weak, speaks strange visions from the Long Eye, a bald weaver with an endless purse, an old woman stitched with golden wire, and a lion and wolf locked in bloody combat. Though the wolf fought hardest, she declares the lion the victor, clutching Leo with startling intensity. The experience unsettles him, making him question whether there might be truth to the old superstitions. Desperate for answers, he asks if he is the lion, but Eisern only scoffs, dismissing him as an ass, leaving Leo shaken and uncertain. In Chapter 26, Savine travels to Valbec with Inquisitor Vic Teufel and her young companion Tallow. Savine tries to charm Vic with compliments and small talk, but Vic remains cold, practical, and unshakable. They discuss Savine's textile mill in Valbec, which recently turned unexpectedly profitable despite earlier troubles with discontented workers and violent ex-soldiers. Savine suspects something unusual behind the sudden success. The contrast between the two women is sharp. Savine polished and privileged, Vic hardened and scarred by years of survival and Inquisition work. Lisbeth, standing in for Zuri, irritates Savine with her useless chatter, while Tallow is awed by Savine's wealth and generosity when she gives him a box of sugared fruits. Upon arriving near Valbec, Vic and Tallow separate from Savine's carriage, disguising themselves as common laborers to blend in. Savine continues on her way, while Vic prepares to confront the city's growing unrest. In Chapter 27, Savine attends a dinner at the Valamir residence in Valbec, enduring both her painful menses and the company of tasteless hosts. She questions Colonel Valamir, Superior Rissenau, and Mayor Parmhalt about business and security in the city. Though Valamir boasts of booming profits, the heavy presence of guards betrays unease. Savine presses about unrest, learning of radical groups called Breakers and Burners, though Rissenau insists there is no danger. A maid, May Broad, accidentally reveals the squalid conditions in the Old Town, families crammed into cellars, open sewers, and unemployment, contradicting claims of worker contentment. When Mistress Valamir threatens to dismiss May, Savine firmly prevents it, asserting her authority. Rissenau grows uncomfortably familiar, but Savine warns him off with cold menace. Finally, though Valamir offers to send her the mill's books, Savine insists on visiting in person, determined to uncover the truth behind Valbec's supposed prosperity and hidden tensions. In Chapter 28, Vic and Tallow infiltrate Valbec's underworld in search of the Breakers. A trail of informants leads them to an old warehouse, where Vic notices a dangerous former ladderman named Gunnar guarding the door. Inside, they discover not a handful of agitators, but nearly 500 armed and furious workers gathered beneath banners calling for rebellion. Judge, a wild and fanatical leader, rouses the crowd to violence, while Malmer argues for careful planning. The shock comes when Superior Riesenau reveals himself as the Weaver, secretly leading the breakers and calling for revolution to seize Valbec and spark a great change. Vic, realizing the scale of the threat, orders Tallow to flee for Adua and warn her employer, while she stays behind. Before she can slip away, Riesenau publicly welcomes her into the fold, putting her in immediate danger as suspicion and violent fervor rise around her. In Chapter 29, Savine visits her Valbec manufactory, escorted by Valamir and guards. She notices the workers' hostility and learns of harsh conditions, long hours, punishments, and forbidden organizing. Valamir reveals the third shed employs hundreds of children, unpaid except for minimal upkeep, living and working in squalor. Savine acknowledges the profitability while suggesting slight improvements to extend productivity. Inside the mills, the atmosphere is tense, the men's silent fury more threatening than insults. While reviewing accounts in Valamir's office, Savine notices armed workers gathering outside. A riot erupts, guards are overwhelmed, and Valamir is injured. Savine hides, pries open a floorboard, and narrowly escapes through the machinery, witnessing brutal violence and death among guards. She crawls through filth and blood into a tunnel, squeezes past a water wheel, and plunges into the river. Disguising herself in rags from the riverbank, she abandons her finery and staggers toward her carriage, desperate to survive. In Chapter 30, Lisbeth waits in Savine's carriage, dreaming of her new role as lady's companion when a mob of breakers attacks. Mistaking her for Savine, they drag her out, beat her, and shackle her with other captured nobles, including Valamir and Karlrik Dan Resling. Curbman tries to restrain the mob's violence, insisting prisoners be judged, not slaughtered, though he knows many crave vengeance. The chained column is led by Locke, a grim ex-weaver who recalls the deaths of his family during a harsh winter and feels nothing but bitterness toward the rich. As the prisoners march through burning Valbec, factories are destroyed, the army is broken, and revolution consumes the city. Savine, disguised among beggars, witnesses the chaos, terrified and desperate to survive. Sparks, a burner, claims control of a square, reveling in destruction and planning executions. Order collapses completely as Valbec descends into anarchy and fire. In Chapter 31, Savine flees through Valbec's burning streets, hunted by rioters. She kills 2 attackers with her sword, but is soon cornered. Desperate, she begs for help from a massive man called Bull, who saves her by brutally killing their leader, Tall Hat. Bull's companion, Sarlby, threatens the rest of the mob with a flatbow, forcing them to retreat. Among Bull's group is Maybroad, the maid Savine earlier defended at the Valamir's dinner. Savine, shaken and filthy, gives a false name, Ardy, but May notices her fine corset and realizes she is wealthy. Instead of exposing her, May covers the truth, quietly pulling Savine's coat closed. She promises Savine safety and takes her inside, treating her with unexpected kindness. Broken, terrified, and exhausted, Savine breaks down crying, clinging to May, as Valbec's uprising continues to rage outside. This moment marks her fall from power into dependence on those beneath her. In Chapter 32, Crown Prince Orso inspects his new division of 500 soldiers trained under Colonel Forrest, and feels pride in his role as commander. The Queen, while critical, admits to being impressed, though she urges Orso to marry rather than play soldier. Orso's satisfaction ends when he is summoned to the House of Questions by King Jallenhorm, Arch-Lector Glokta, and Superior Pike. They reveal a full-scale uprising in Valbec where workers, led by the breakers and burners, have seized the city, erected barricades, and taken hostages. The rebellion threatens to spread across the Union. With no other forces available, Orso's troops must respond. When Orso learns that Savine, Glokta's daughter, is trapped inside the city, he is shaken but resolves to march immediately. Determined to prove himself and desperate to save her, Orso orders Colonel Forrest to prepare the division for departure to Valbec. In Chapter 33, Ricca wakes beside Leo, who complains about his mother's cautious strategy and about Crown Prince Orso, dismissing him as useless. Ricca argues they must wait for Orso's reinforcements, but Leo insists he is being denied glory. Their morning is interrupted by a night herald bearing news for Lady Finri. The camp gathers, and Ricca slips into the War Council, where Union lords, northern chiefs, and Lady Finri await word. The herald delivers a royal message. Orso will not be coming north. Instead, he has been sent to suppress a major uprising in Valbec, where the breakers have seized the city. The council erupts in anger and despair at the Union's failure to support them, with voices blaming both the king and each other. Amid the chaos, Leo grows eager for the opportunity to prove himself, while Ricca realizes the North must fight without Orso's help and save themselves. In Chapter 34, Scale Ironhand, once a feared warrior, has grown into a bloated and drunken king, clinging to past glories, while his brother, Black Calder, quietly rules from the shadows. Calder hosts Master Sulphur, a mysterious emissary of a powerful order, who warns that chaos must be contained and reminds him of the bloody lessons of Osrung. Stour Nightfall arrives late, mocking Scale before reconciling in a show of false affection, then boasting loudly of his victories. Scale praises him as heir and declares Stour the future ruler of the North, invoking the legacy of their grandfather Bethid. Calder, however, despairs at his son's recklessness and fears he will blunder into a trap set by Brock and the Dogman. As the hall roars its support for Stour, Clover and Wonderful note the folly of it all, recognizing Calder's frustration and Sulphur's subtle reminder that everyone serves someone. In Chapter 35, Savine hides with May and her parents Gunnar and Liddy in Valbec after the uprising. The city remains tense, with fear, hunger, and lawlessness everywhere. Gunnar is drawn into helping the breakers, while Liddy warns him against trouble. Savine struggles with guilt over killing men during her escape, haunted by their faces and shaken by how easily she took lives. She also experiences the harsh reality of poverty, stripped of her wealth and comforts, realizing she had once romanticized the suffering she profited from. May confronts Savine, revealing she recognized her from Valamir's dinner before the uprising and knows her true identity as Lady Savine Glokta. Instead of exposing her, May demands a bargain: safety for her family, a pardon for Gunnar, jobs, and a better life once order is restored. Savine, desperate and powerless, agrees. They seal the deal with a handshake, binding Savine to May's terms. In Chapter 36, Rhysanow celebrates the toppling of King Casimir's statue, promising a new monument for the workers, though Vic sees him as vain and half-mad. Malmer worries about food shortages, water scarcity, and rising lawlessness. Violence continues in Valbec with beatings, hangings, and looting despite claims of order. Judge, leader of the Burners, has seized control of part of the city, taken hundreds of prisoners, and begun staging trials for collaborators. Rhysanow dismisses the threat, preferring to dream of manifestos and principles, but Vic insists the prisoners must be secured if negotiations are ever to succeed. She volunteers to confront Judge herself, persuading Rhysanow to let her go. Knowing the danger, she recruits Gunnar Broad to gather fighting men despite his reluctance. As Rhysanow indulges in grand visions of monuments and ideals, Vic prepares for the harsh reality ahead, fearing Judge's extremism will doom them all. In Chapter 37, Vic, Broad, and Sarlby enter the Burners' territory, where destruction, filth, and violent slogans cover the streets. They reach the courthouse, now Judge's domain, where chaos and cruelty reign. Judge presides over a mock trial, mocking justice while a jury of whores jeers and a naked, broken lawyer cowers. When Vic demands the release of prisoners for negotiation, Judge resists, declaring freedom must be taken by force. Tension rises as Broad nearly sparks violence, but Vic steadies him. Judge, both volatile and theatrical, finally agrees to hand over the prisoners, dismissing Rhysanow as weak, but allowing the breakers to collect captives. As they leave, Vic and her men discover the yard strung with corpses. Men, women, young and old, all hanging from beams. Judge's idea of equality is revealed as mass death. The breakers walk away shaken, realizing how dark ideals can become in the hands of zealots. In Chapter 38, Leo fumes over Prince Orso's absence and demands battle, but Lady Finree remains cautious, stressing that survival requires patience. From the ruins of a fortress, they watch the Union army retreat, while Stour Nightfall advances recklessly ahead of his kin. Finree seizes the chance to strike, planning an ambush at a bridge where Stor's forces will be vulnerable. She will bait him with Leo's standard, feign a trapped rearguard, then crush him between the river and hidden troops. The Dogman supports the plan, praising Finree's leadership and loyalty. Leo dreams of glory, eager to lead, but Finree refuses, ordering him to stay with the cavalry reserves in Sudlandal. When he protests, she fiercely reminds him of his father's death and her fear of losing him too. Shamed, Leo accepts, promising to remain with the reserves as Finree prepares to spring her trap. In Chapter 39, Savine labors in Valbek's bucket line, exhausted and half-drowned from hours hauling water to fight fires. The mills and buildings across the river burn uncontrollably while her side of the city narrowly survives. The women and children around her collapse from fatigue, but the flames are finally beaten back. Savine, raw-handed and choking on smoke, realizes the city she once admired for its industry has become rubble and ash. The burners retreat, leaving destruction behind them. Rumors spread that Crown Prince Orso is marching with 5,000 soldiers and the Inquisition, expected to reach the city the next day. While most dread their arrival, Savine feels relief at the thought of Orso's presence, clinging to him as a symbol of rescue. Drained of emotion, she watches Valbek's ruins smolder, knowing the rebellion's brief chaos is ending and the crown's authority will soon return. In Chapter 40, Crown Prince Orso debates how to approach Valbek. Colonel Forrest urges an attack, but Orso refuses, reasoning that destroying the city or killing citizens would create more rebels. Instead, he orders the army to surround Valbek, block all routes, and display cannons without using them to assert control. Orso decides negotiation is the best path, and sends Yoke and Tallow under a white flag to request talks with Mulmer, one of the rebel leaders. Superior Pike disapproves, warning the Archlector may not approve either, but Orso insists on dialogue. During this, Yorosulfur, emissary of Bayaz and representative of the Magi, arrives, claiming to observe and advise. Orso, torn between doubt and duty, masks his uncertainty with humor and bravado. Tunney, usually cynical, remarks that Orso's caution might make him a better-than-average king, hinting at unexpected growth in the prince's leadership. In Chapter 41, Rick attends to her nerves while waiting with Eisern and her father for Store Nightfall's approach. Using her long eye, she sees Black Calder's men in the woods, including the Nail, but most others cannot. Eisern urges caution, warning Dogman of the threat. Shivers volunteers to scout, confirming the enemy's presence before being chased back under a hail of arrows. Black Calder's forces surge from the trees with Bethed's old standard, forcing the Carls to shift positions and prepare for battle. Meanwhile, Leo grows restless with waiting, frustrated under his mother Lady Finree's command. Despite his impatience, she maintains discipline, insisting they hold until the perfect moment. When Nightfall's Carls flood the valley and clash at the bridge, Finree calmly judges the timing, preparing Anglin's cavalry for a decisive strike. Both sides brace as Red Hill becomes the stage for a looming confrontation. In Chapter 42, Leo Danbrock leads Anglin's cavalry into battle, rallying his men with cries of vengeance and honor. They charge through chaos as Union forces falter, and Leo cuts down Northmen in a frenzy, savoring the violence and freedom of combat. He is unhorsed, nearly killed, but claws his way back into the fight, hacking through enemies alongside his companions. The bridge becomes the bloody center of the battle, littered with corpses and streaming with rain. In the clash, Barnava is struck down by an arrow, devastating Leo but fueling his rage. He and his allies push forward through archers and shield walls, carving their way onto the bridge despite exhaustion. As the fighting stalls, Leo and Stour Nightfall finally face each other across the span. Stour challenges him to settle the war in single combat within the circle, and Leo accepts, determined to prove himself in the duel. Part 3. In Chapter 43, Crown Prince Orso prepares for peace negotiations with the Breakers, accompanied by Colonel Forrest and Superior Pike. Malmer, Brother Heron, and Sister Teufel arrive to present their demands. Teufel secretly passes Orso a note revealing herself as an agent of the Archlector and advising him. Malmer is desperate, food is scarce, and amnesty could secure surrender. Orso listens to the Breakers' demands for reforms, but refuses promises he cannot keep, stressing that the closed council would not honor them. Instead, he offers amnesty to all Breakers who surrender and release their hostages by sunset, warning that otherwise the city will be surrounded and starved. Malmer agrees to take the offer back to his people. Pike admits Orso handled the negotiations well, noting Teufel's role as their secret ally. Orso hides his unease, worrying about Savine's fate among the hostages. In Chapter 44, Rika helps Eisern tend the wounded after the battle, reflecting on the cost of war and her growing importance since using the long eye to spot Calder's ambush. Eisern tells her that leaders must take control rather than drift helplessly, hinting Rika already holds the reins of influence. Later, Rika joins Leo, his mother Finri, and Dogman as they argue over Leo's decision to fight Stour Nightfall in single combat. Finri pleads with him to reconsider, while Dogman warns of the danger, but Leo insists it is their only chance to reclaim Ufrith. Rika hesitates, knowing she could discourage him, but instead confirms her vision of the lion defeating the wolf. A royal herald then arrives with a decree naming Leo Lord Governor of Angland. Emboldened, Leo declares he will face Stour regardless of opposition, leaving Finri powerless and Rika guilty for encouraging his resolve. In Chapter 45, Calder rages at Stour's decision to fight Leo in single combat, blaming himself for indulging his son and warning Scale that such recklessness endangers all their gains. Scale dismisses Calder's concerns, mocking his delays in ending the war and insisting that Stour's duel will bring swift victory. Calder stresses the risks, but Stour arrogantly recalls past triumphs and belittles his father's caution. Scale ultimately asserts his authority as king, naming Stour both heir and champion, declaring he will fight for Ufrith in the circle. Calder storms out defeated. Afterward, Scale briefly rebukes Stour for disrespecting his father, reminding him he owes everything to Calder. Discussion turns to weapons, and Clover warns that swords and duels are a fool's choice, since life once lost cannot be regained. Stour dismisses him as a coward, while Clover quietly affirms survival over pride, then follows Calder from the hall. In Chapter 46, Leo struggles with guilt over Barnava's death while preparing for his duel with Stour Nightfall. His companions debate which weapon he should choose, but Rika interrupts, reminding him that mindset matters more than steel. She reassures Leo with her visions, urging him to fight hard and dirty, and he decides to wield Barnava's sword to honor his fallen friend. Meanwhile, Clover reflects on loyalty and survival as he talks with Call Shivers, who warns him about Stour and points him toward Rika's importance. Crowds gather at the circle, with leaders from both sides present, including Scale, Black Calder, the Dogman, and Lady Brock. Tensions flare as Stour mocks Rika, deepening her hatred for him. Isern Afael is chosen as judge, and the duel's stakes are declared: Ufrith and the Protectorate. After a coin flip ritual with Shiver's shield, both Leo and Stour refuse choice, agreeing to fight with their own weapons. In Chapter 47, Leo faces Stour Nightfall in the circle. He begins determined to overwhelm his opponent, but Stour's speed and skill soon force him onto the defensive. The crowd roars as Stour lands cut after cut, bleeding and exhausting Leo. Watching helplessly, Rika struggles with guilt until she forces the long eye open, glimpsing Stour's sword and the certainty of its strike. She screams for Leo to go low, guiding him at the crucial moment. Leo falls deliberately and swings weakly, but his blade cuts deep into Stour's thigh. Seizing the chance, Leo disarms Stour and stands over him with both swords as the stunned crowd erupts in triumph. The onlookers chant for Stour's death, but Leo, despite his wounds and exhaustion, refuses. He spares Stour's life, driving both blades into the turf beside his enemy's face, collapsing soon after. The duel ends with Leo victorious, but barely standing. In Chapter 48, the Breakers meet in a ruined warehouse and agree to surrender, accepting Crown Prince Orso's amnesty. Exhausted and out of food, they know the uprising is lost. Malmer laments the failed revolution, and Broad reflects bitterly that, as always, the poor pay the price. That night, columns of starving people stream out of Valbec. Soldiers and inquisitors await them, collecting weapons and questioning suspected rebels. Rumors spread that the Inquisition is arresting people, deepening fear. Broad, May, Liddy, and Artie move with the crowd, uncertain if they face mercy or punishment. At the checkpoint, Artie suddenly declares herself as Savine Dan Glokta, daughter of the Archlector, demanding to speak to Crown Prince Orso. The Inquisitor, stunned by her commanding presence, agrees. Savine insists that Broad, May, and Liddy be taken with her. As they follow, Broad learns May had arranged this plan, claiming it was time to protect their family. In Chapter 49, Savine struggles with fear and the loss of her former confidence after surviving Valbec. Her body bears the scars of hardship and she feels broken, no longer recognizing the powerful woman she once was. Crown Prince Orso visits her, visibly shaken by her condition but relieved she is alive. He expresses regret for his delay and confesses his feelings, admitting he cannot live without her. To her shock, Orso proposes marriage, declaring that she was meant to be a queen and that together they could build something greater. Savine, overwhelmed and unprepared, initially cannot respond, but his vulnerability and sincerity break through her defenses. In a surge of emotion, she kisses him, and they give in to their desire for one another. For Savine, stripped of calculation and pretense, the moment is raw and real, driven by survival, longing, and the chance of something new. In Chapter 50, Vic interrogates Malmer, one of the captured rebel leaders. Though she respects him, she remains loyal to her duty. Malmer confirms that Rissenau once called himself the Weaver, but hinted the name came from someone else, a mysterious figure he revered. Malmer recalls a meeting years earlier, where an unknown man described as the founder of the feast was present but silent. Before Malmer can reveal more, Superior Pike enters with his practicals. He praises Vic for her cunning work in Valbec and informs her that Arch-Lector Glokta has summoned her back to Adua to be honored. Pike takes over Malmer's interrogation, leaving Vic uneasy. Though she dislikes abandoning Malmer, she accepts that he is a lost cause and departs. Pike hints at a shared history in Anglin's camps, subtly reminding Vic of her vulnerability. As she leaves, Pike prepares to question Malmer further about the Weaver. In Chapter 51, Orso wakes in Valbec beside Savine, elated by their night together and determined to change his life. He vows to be a better man, a true leader, and imagines a future of progress and reform with Savine at his side. His optimism collapses when Hildy draws his attention to a gibbet outside the camp. There, Malmer, whom Orso had promised amnesty, hangs dead. Superior Pike informs him that 200 rebels have already been executed and will be displayed along the road, all under Arch-Lector Glokta's direct orders, backed by the closed council. Yorusulfur argues that swift, merciless justice is necessary to ensure stability. Orso protests but realizes he is powerless, his promises meaningless in the face of his father's authority. His triumph turns to guilt and self-loathing as he sees himself not as Orso the Merciful, but still a disappointment. In Chapter 52, Leo recovers from his duel wounds, reflecting with his mother on sparing Stour Nightfall. She urges him to think beyond revenge, suggesting peace with the North could be more valuable than endless war. A letter from the king invites Leo to Adua for a triumph, celebrating his victory. Determined to take the next step, Leo visits Stour despite his injuries. Black Calder warns him but allows the meeting. Inside, Stour, bitter over his defeat, mocks Leo, but Leo pushes back, insisting he seeks not a servant but an ally. He appeals to Stour's hunger for glory, arguing they both crave fame and victory and could achieve more together than his enemies. After testing him with a dagger at his throat, Stour relents, intrigued by Leo's boldness. The two shake hands, forging a dangerous but potentially powerful alliance between the young lion and the great wolf. In Chapter 53, Rika confronts Leo after learning he met with Stour Nightfall. Furious that Leo spared her enemy, she accuses him of breaking his promise and calls him reckless, arrogant, and vain. Leo defends his choice, insisting victory gave him the right to decide, and argues that making peace is wiser than endless killing. Their argument leaves their relationship fractured, with Leo walking away bitterly. Rika's anger deepens as she reflects on her visions from the Long Eye and her inability to control them. Later, she vents to her father and Izern, who remind her that Leo's flaws were always clear and warn her against clinging to vengeance. Her father urges her to let go of grudges, calling them an empty chest that only burdens life. Finally, he tells Rika she will accompany Leo to Adua, representing the North in the Union's politics, despite her doubts and resentment. In Chapter 54, Savine returns to her father's grand townhouse in Adua, accompanied by Broad, Liddy, and May. The Broads are overwhelmed by the wealth and size of the estate, with servants, guards, and endless rooms that make them feel out of place. Savine is greeted warmly by her companion Zuri, who introduces her brothers Harun and Rabik, recently brought north with her help. Despite Savine's attempt to act as though nothing has changed, her brittle smile reveals her lingering trauma from Valbec. Zuri takes responsibility for settling the Broads, explaining the vast scale of Savine's wealth and influence, including her multiple houses, businesses, and staff. She makes clear that working for Savine means hard labor, but also loyalty and protection. The Broads are given rooms of their own, stunned by the luxury, while Broad reflects uneasily that fate has brought them fortune they never earned, falling on them like rain. In Chapter 55, Savine returns home, struggling with trauma from Valbec. She meets her mother, who notices her fragility, and they share drinks as Savine tries to hide her broken state. Seeking comfort, Savine reveals she has received a marriage proposal and intends to accept it, Prince Orso's. Her mother is horrified and insists she cannot marry him. Savine defends Orso passionately, claiming he is misunderstood and that they are in love. At last, her mother confesses the truth. Before becoming king, her affair with him resulted in Savine's birth. This makes Savine the king's illegitimate daughter, and Orso's half-sister. Stunned and horrified, Savine realizes her father is not her father, and that she has been intimate with her brother. Her mother begs her to keep the secret from everyone, especially Orso, and insists she must refuse his proposal. Savine is left reeling, her identity and ambitions shattered. In Chapter 56, Orso shares drinks with his companions, reflecting on Leo's victory over Stour Nightfall and the end of the Northern War. Though others praise Leo's glory, Orso feels overshadowed and guilty about the executions after Valbec. Returning to Adua, he meets Queen Therese, who commends him but urges him to think of dynastic duty, suggesting a marriage alliance. Orso, however, reveals he already has someone in mind, Savine. He receives her letter and with great anticipation opens it, only to be devastated. She refuses his proposal and demands he never contact her again. The rejection shatters him, leaving him furious, heartbroken, and drowning in self-loathing. Orso hides his pain from his mother, who eagerly discusses his triumph and future marriage prospects. While she celebrates, Orso sinks into despair, realizing he has lost not just Savine, but also the hope of becoming a better man with her at his side. In Chapter 57, Vic meets Tallow at her apartment after Valbec. He is shaken by the executions, while she insists they chose the only path available. She pays him with a golden coin for his quick work, encouraging him despite his guilt. Later, Vic is summoned by Arch-Lector Glokta, who praises her loyalty and success in Valbec. Though he offers her better lodgings, she refuses, preferring to wait until the work is complete. Their conversation shifts to lingering threats. Riesenau and Judge escaped, and the breakers remain dangerous. Glokta suggests the rebellion may have been encouraged by powerful nobles, not just dreamers. He reveals his suspicion of young lords such as Huygen, Berezin, and especially Isher, who grew wealthy from new land reforms and remain suspiciously content. Vic recognizes unrest exists at both ends of society, while Glokta warns that such troubled times are never far from crisis. In Chapter 58, Rike arrives in Adua with Leo and his companions. Overwhelmed by the city's vastness, she encounters Bayaz, the first of the Magi, who shows an unsettling interest in her Long Eye and introduces her to his ally, Yoru Sulfur. Bayaz warns that the Union has many enemies and hints that real power lies behind the scenes, not at the front. Rike continues to struggle with visions from her gift, feeling cursed rather than blessed. Leo, eager for glory, is greeted as a hero with a parade arranged by the crown. He meets Bremer den Gorst, his childhood idol, but is disillusioned by the man's frailty and strange voice. At the palace, Leo faces Arch-Lector Glokta, who congratulates him but undercuts his achievement, criticizing his leniency with Stour and revealing that Orso will share his triumph. Leo, humiliated and frustrated, begins to see the harsh reality of politics in Adua. In Chapter 59, Savine visits a canal construction project with Broad and Zuri to check on her investment. They discover that Master Court has shifted her share to Lady Celestin Huygen, backed by Valint and Balk. Though Court claims he had no choice during Savine's absence, Savine refuses to accept being cut out. She recalls her suffering in Valbec and her recent heartbreak, declaring she has lost her patience. Reading her signal, Broad intimidates Court by violently lifting his desk and looming over him until Court panics and restores her deal. Savine reclaims her partnership and warns Court never to cross her again. Outside, she assures Broad he is no mere coachman, but a natural at the work she requires, rewarding him through Zuri with a golden 20-mark coin. Broad, unsettled by his role in Savine's ruthless tactics, questions the morality of violence, but Zuri justifies his purpose. In Chapter 60, Leo hosts a grand celebration in Adua's Hall of Mirrors, where he feels out of place despite constant flattery. He meets influential nobles of the Open Council, Isher, Berezin, and Huygen, who encourage him to oppose the closed council and hint at loyalty against Bayaz's influence. They urge him to become their champion, just as his grandfather once was. Meanwhile, Leo is charmed by Celestin Hugin, who flirts and draws his attention. Across the hall, Rika feels awkward and jealous, especially seeing Leo with Celeste. She unexpectedly bonds with Savine, who swaps jewelry with her and shares a rare moment of honesty. Yet Savine's bitterness soon returns, especially when she notices Celeste competing for Leo. Determined to reclaim control, she outshines Celeste by recounting her harrowing survival during the Valbec uprising, captivating Leo. Drawn together, Savine and Leo arrange a private meeting, leaving Orso to watch, heartbroken and drunk. In Chapter 61, Leo sneaks through the streets with Geran, who assumes they are meeting in secret together, but Leo reveals he is going to see Savine. Geran is disappointed, but Leo brushes him off and enters the house. Inside, he is greeted by one of Savine's servants and nervously climbs to her room. Savine waits, composed, in full control, pouring wine and testing his confidence. She toys with him, questioning his scars, pressing his nerves, and keeping him off balance. Leo, both intimidated and excited, realizes she seeks not conversation, but intimacy. Savine introduces pearl dust, a stimulant, forcing him to inhale it, which leaves him disoriented but bolder. Their encounter quickly escalates into passion, with Savine dominant at times, yet Leo finding bursts of courage to take control. Their meeting cements a dangerous and intoxicating connection fueled by risk, manipulation, and desire. In Chapter 62, Rika wakes up in Crown Prince Orso's bed after a drunken night together. Orso surprises her by bringing breakfast and a news bill that mentions her as the Witch of the North. The two share a playful exchange, contrasting Orso's awkward charm and self-doubt with Rika's blunt humor. Orso confides that although he convinced rebels to surrender, they were later executed, leaving him guilty and disillusioned about his role as a hero. Rika reassures him with her pragmatic outlook, and their bond deepens. Their moment is interrupted when Orso's mother, the High Queen, enters and discovers them together. Rika awkwardly tries to cover herself, while Orso hastily introduces her as an emissary from the Protectorate. The Queen, unimpressed but pragmatic, leaves with a sharp remark about diplomacy. Afterward, Rika and Orso joke about the encounter before resuming their intimacy, sealing their growing connection. In Chapter 63, Adua celebrates a lavish victory parade. Leo Danbrock and Crown Prince Orso ride at the front, cheered by enormous crowds, though Leo receives the loudest praise as the young lion who defeated Stour Nightfall. Orso reflects bitterly on his own failures, but also shows surprising honesty and humility, even as Leo boasts of his exploits. Broad, Liddy, and May watch the procession, their resentment simmering until Practicals sees a heckler shouting against Orso. Broad nearly intervenes, but is pulled back by his family, reminded of his promise to keep out of trouble. In the royal box, Savine struggles with jealousy, drug use, and her tangled identity after learning she is the king's illegitimate child. Her tense exchange with Arch-Lector Glokta reveals Bayaz's shadowy interest in her. Orso later drifts back to Rika, amused by her bluntness and her dangerous companions. Meanwhile, Vic observes the spectacle cynically before meeting Tallow and his sister. In Chapter 64, Stour Nightfall recovers from his duel defeat, appearing subdued but reflective. Over drinks with his uncle, King Scale, and his warriors, he muses that losing has given him new perspective. Life is short, and one must seize power before it slips away. Suddenly, Stour murders Scale with a hidden knife, and his men slaughter the old king's followers in a brutal coup. Clover, caught off guard, realizes Stour intends to reshape the North through blood. To prove loyalty, Clover is forced to kill Wonderful, his closest companion, in a cold betrayal that secures his survival. Black Calder arrives to witness the massacre and confronts his son, but Stour boldly declares himself king of the Northmen. With Scale dead, the old guard wiped out, and the young lion as an ally, Stour seizes power, dismissing Bethod's legacy and announcing he will pursue his own ruthless vision for the North. In Chapter 65, Crown Prince Orso wakes in the night to find the palace in chaos. His mother silently leads him to his father's bedchamber, where members of the closed council, physicians and guards, gather around King Jazal's body. The royal physician confirms what everyone fears. Jazal I is dead, despite showing no signs of illness the previous night. Shock ripples through the court as grief and disbelief take hold. Orso, numb and filled with regret for never having spoken meaningfully with his father, realizes the finality of the moment. Bayaz, the first of the Magi, places a hand on Orso's shoulder and declares, "Long live the king," marking the transfer of power. Orso, once dismissed as a feckless prince, now stands as the new king of the Union, with the weight of rule suddenly thrust upon him.